All right, welcome everybody back to the DM's Corner. I'm your kind of host, Malcolm, the Gentleman Game Master, and we have Rene Rodriguez with us. And I decided to start this little 10, 15-minute segments where we talk to Dungeon Masters and Game Masters alike about just like the love, because we all love this stuff, so we just want to talk to them. And with this particular episode, I decided why not start with the people that I play with the most. So Rene plays with my group, the D&D Experience Point, on Meetup. And we met recently, maybe known you since last year, maybe end of the year, or was it February? Wow, February. Wow, it's crazy because that's when I started the group, but I didn't really meet till February, till the first DM's meeting. Wow, man, it feels like so long. It feels like we've been playing and doing this for years in a weird way. And so he plays with us. And I have when I met Rene, like I said, it was for I threw a Dungeon Master workshop, and just when I start talking to you, I was like, wow, this guy gets it. Like, I feel like we're closer to like the age range. Like I was playing nothing. I love all my players, but I was playing for a lot of like younger players, a lot of newer players to the game, and you had this vibe of like, okay, you had a childhood that I knew was different, but there was enough similarities to where like, okay, we vibe off of a lot of the same things. And so sure enough, you played an Eberron game with us. And ever since I've been fascinated and you've kind of become my Eberron guru as we've kind of gone into this. So here I am rambling. Let's get into Rene. And so let's start with the most mundane question is like, what's your D&D story? How'd you get into it? How'd you fall in love with it? And then how'd you start, game mastering or dungeon mastering?
So how I got into it was a little bit different than most people. Like, my dad was a huge nerd, and he was a jock too, and so we never quite understood this. And so when he was in high school, a buddy of his introduced him to D&D, but he never played it. Instead, he would read all these rules and make up little games with miniatures that he was collecting. And, this is the 1980s. This is East LA. There aren't a lot of hobby shops. We had to go into Glendale, or we had to go into Pasadena.
Yep.
I went to Burbank to Last Grenadier. So I know if my brother sees this, he's going to be like, Last Grenadier, yeah. But that's what we grew up in. And so as we were kids, like, I remember being like 5 or 6 years old, and he would set up these like intricate, just like setups for games that he was playing with his buddies. And so he got them in it, and I'd like wander in. I'm like, what are you doing? Why are all these knights on the table with these dragons? And you guys are taking this serious. And then when I became like about 8 or 9, he started running games for my brothers and I, and not knowing that it was so similar in D&D until much later, that we grew up rolling dice and looking, tracking hit points and health and what spells we got. And then high school came. My freshman year, I got invited to play at a hobby shop that's no longer in existence, but we spent tons of times, like, we were the normal kids who like showed up there. We were the regulars, and it was called Something Unusual in Glendale. And they had a bulletin board, like, if you want to play, sign up. So we were having a family barbecue. We had family over from Texas, and I get the phone call, and I'm like, Pops, like, I can go. And so he's just like, if you want to play, he's like, your cousin's going to be here, when you get back, it'll be an hour or two. And sure enough, it was. I played my one game. I was like an elf, and like an elf fighter, and then that was it. I never played again. Fast forward sophomore year of high school, I come back from spending a couple weeks in the college campus, playing games with other kids who were like totally into 40K. And so like, I took my Space Marine Codex with me. And
so cool.
Like, I had my Social D albums, I had all my, my Soundgarden, and then I'm like carrying my Codex everywhere, and kids from like all over the place are just like, what is that? And I start telling the stories about it, and they're like, man, we want to. So some kid actually brought an entire army, and we wound up playing on campus, and like in the cafeteria. And then I get home, my brothers are fully in it, my dad's in it. Like, I was only gone 2 weeks. My dad has built terrain. There's mountains, there's a hive city. He's like, I bought you some Ultramarines. And
Wow.
that's where it started. And so college comes, I continue to play 40K. My roommate was playing D&D. I was just like, oh, cool. He invited me over to his house. I'm like, I'm gonna stay here, do my graphic design stuff, and maybe I'll play one day. And then that was it. Like I never played again until last year. My classroom became the epicenter of the D&D club. They asked if they could run it in my classroom. I'm like, sure. And a lot of these kids are high functioning. They're on the autism spectrum.
Hmm.
Um, and so one day, my son was diagnosed as that also, and so we're just like, okay, like we're trying to figure out like what can we do to reach him, to get him to be more social, to be more creative,
Yeah.
to take these tendencies that he have and just kind of narrow them down, and get him to communicate better and clearer and make good choices. And so what I started to notice in my classroom is those same kids who had the same um,
Hmm.
factors as my son, uh,
Hmm.
they started to like come out of their shell. And I started asking like, what? You came from like not talking at all to being completely verbal. What's going on?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, and they were ashamed. Like some of them were ashamed, and some were embarrassed. So like, well, there's this game, and I'm like, what game? And they're like, oh, you're just gonna laugh, Mr. Rodriguez. Like, it's Dungeons and Dragons. I'm like, cool. Um,
Right.
can I play? And they're like, you want to play with us? You're like 40. Why do you want to? I'm like, look, guys. And then I start telling them my story. Like, and they're like, so you have stuff? I brought in like my old 40K miniatures. I still had some. And I'm like, here, you guys can use whatever I have for the 40K game you're playing. I'm like, but there's one caveat. You guys have to teach me how to play D&D. So I
Wow.
played one game with them before school. I played a couple games before school completely shut down, but there was one that we started, and then Thanksgiving break came. Um, my son, like my wife and I were at Target, and we saw the essentials box. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna grab it. It's $20. The rules look simple enough. I'm like, this is what it's. And I had talked to my wife, and I started reading all these articles about how it's great for kids. All the play that I got to do as a kid with all the miniatures and all the games, like that just it was like that scene in Ratatouille where you're like and you're like and you're home again. That's what learning about D&D and playing with my kids for the first time was like for me.
Wow. That's
And
awesome.
so and it was really cool. And then so then my brother starts to call me up, and we're talking, and he's just like, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, we can't this weekend, like I promised my son and my daughter we're gonna play D&D. And he's just like, dude, he's like, I used to DM, and that your niece and nephew, who are also on the spectrum, they're waiting to play. And I'm like, dude, let's do family Christmas time. So we
Yeah.
ran the first family Christmas game, and that was the first time my dad had ever played D&D. And as he's playing, he's watching his grandkids who are on the spectrum like have this experience, and for the first time, they're in the room together playing. They're not in separate corners like playing, but not with
Yeah.
each other. They're playing separately, like they're playing together. And they're like, okay, I'm gonna like my son is like, I'm gonna throw my cousin's character up on the roof, and then they're gonna go down, and then I'm gonna bash the door so that it's and I'm like, oh my god, what have we done? And my dad realized, like, then my dad got on board, and he's just like reading all these articles. And so what I did is I was looking for a way to be like, to make sure, like, am I it's that question when you first start playing D&D, am I playing it the right way? And the
Hmm.
answer is always yes. We know
Hmm.
that because we play now.
Yep.
um, and for me being a dad, it was much more of like, I want to know that I'm giving the best experience to my own kids before I started DMing for my students. And so then I was looking around, and I saw an article that linked me to Meetup about how there's this whole group of players doing Dungeons and Dragons. I'm like, maybe I'll try that. And then I saw yours, and I checked it out, and what really got me into it is just like, oh, the videos that you had posted on Instagram, like, here's why I do what I do. And then being a teacher, like that video that you put out, like, here's why being a paid DM is a thing. And I'm like, man, this cat knows what's going on. Like, you don't just give away your services for free. There's a reason you're putting that time and energy the way that teachers do. And I'm like, okay, I'm sold. So I signed up for it, went to that thing. It was only supposed to be 2 hours. We wound up talking for like three or
Man,
four afterward. Like, I met
absolutely.
Eddie, I met Nick, and I'm like, these guys are cool. And that's when Eddie said, I'm gonna run Avernus. I'm like, I want in. I want to be able to play an adult game. And then that's when like I shocked you guys, because I'm like, yeah, I've never played with adults. And the look on all of your faces, it was like
It
the
was such a
the
surprise.
record scratch. I was like, "Urgh." And everyone was like, you've never played with adults? I'm like, I've only played with kids, and like my brother, who's like just a big kid too. And
Yeah.
yeah, we had that first Eberron game. I met Jason, I met Colin, and a couple of your buddies, and I was just like, yeah. And that was the last in-person game I played. It was my
Wow.
first one with adults, and then the world shut down.
I'm glad we
And
got you in
then
before.
yeah, I mean, I was, and it left me with such a great feeling because, um, with that game, I was able to see how you can tell a story without having to write it down, how your players incorporated their backgrounds. Like I didn't really know how to play. Jason was right there by my side. No, brother, man, this is what you got to do. This is how you do this. This is when you do it. Your action, your bonus action. I'm like, okay, cool. And it wasn't condescending in any way,
No.
which is what I loved about it. Like
But you
everyone
get
at
in a
the table.
lot of circles some weird way. You often get that. So I'm
Yeah.
glad to.
And I'm glad like I've had that experience with you all because it could have gone a different way,
Yeah.
but then you know the more that we've played together, the better it's been. And so so I went from doing that and playing that Ebron game, and then like that Ebron itch, like I started DMing. Like after that session, I was DMing like almost every day. Like Christmas break was ridiculous. We played every single day. When things shut down, like we were making
Yeah.
terrain and we were playing almost every single day. Like after the kids were done with their work, they're like, Daddy, let's play. I'm like, all right, cool. We got my wife involved, so she plays
That's awesome.
sometimes. I had my mom who turned 55 play for the first time
Wow.
with my kids, and they were like, Grandma, no, no, this is what you do, Grandma. You roll the dice like this, and this is what it means on your character sheet. It was
That's
great because you got a
awesome.
7 and a 9-year-old telling her how to do that. And then in the midst of the shutdown, my high school students became bored. The guy who was running the D&D club for them, he was getting bogged down. He was a middle school teacher, and he's just like, there's a lot that these middle school parents are demanding. And I'm like, well, if you would like, I can kind of do that.
Yeah.
If you want me to do that, I can run it. I'll figure it out. And then we started running it, and then Wizards of the Coast set up that thing for clubs. Were like, hey, you can get everything for free. Put in the code, did it, told the kids, hey, I know you guys want to play D&D. We have everything now, and for our club. And they're like, what? And I'm like, so I set up a poll before school ended. They chose 3 of the adventures. They chose Eberron, they chose Curse of Strahd, which we're currently playing, and
Mhm.
then they chose Out of the Abyss. So we're in the midst of this stuff, and they're like, they're still teaching me. They're like, yeah, that's the wrong thing to check. And I'm like, okay, well, what should it be? Like,
Right? Yeah.
and they're like, why are we telling you? I'm like, I said, because I'm still learning how to DM, and you guys have been playing. Even at 14, you guys have been playing longer than I have. And one kid goes, how long you been playing? I'm like, since November.
Yep.
And they're like, what? Why are you running this then? I'm like, do you know another adult who wants to do it for you? And they're like, all right, well, okay, so we'll teach you. And I'm like, okay, cool, I'll be lenient.
But if I had to answer those kids, I tell them it's because you're a storyteller at heart. And I think people who understand how to storytell, it doesn't matter if you know all the rules. You know how many times, if I had to count every time during a game, I say a D4, I know that a potion should be 2D4 plus 4, but I'll be like, what's that again? Should I have to look that up? And I'm like, Malcolm, come on. But it's like, I have so much in my head. Some people can have like photographic memory where they can catalog all that stuff. While I can't do that often, what I do know I can do is I can kind of facilitate that table in a way that and I can and you have to, as a DM, you don't have to be everything to all people. Like you have to be able to look at Jason and go, Jason's a great referee. He knows all the rules that I don't know. I know that I can look, and you can't rely on it, but it's great to have players like you. I can go, hey, speaking of Eberron, what happened in the past for this certain thing to be this way, and you'll
Yeah,
tell me, and that helps a game run smoother than to be like, I'm the DM, I've got to stop, take 10 minutes because I've got to learn it all by myself. It's a collaborative process with you and the players, so you're doing that with your students, and that's really cool. I think it's even cool that you said, like, it's great to know that, like, we've all been playing D&D even though we weren't playing D&D. You were playing D&D with your dad, it just wasn't called D&D. It was, you were role playing, and that's the whole, kind of reason you're doing the exercise in the first place. So
yeah. I
very,
mean,
very cool.
and that's what I loved about it. It was being able, because I mean, I think it's part of our culture too, being like, we always have a story for everything, and everyone's just like, how do you always have a story for everything? It's just like, it's called life experience. It's
Yeah,
like, that's what you're doing. And also like, I just grew up on science fiction, fantasy comics. So like
yeah,
that urge to tell a story that to take a character who literally starts like at a level 1, or who has a background where they're already set up to not succeed. That I think, and especially coming from like the background that I have, where I grew up in East LA, right? Like, the cops were the bad guys. And back then it wasn't the PC thing to say. But
Yeah.
if you grew up in that area, then you knew, like, you had to watch what you're saying. So you already had things stacked against you. So finding any piece of outlet, right, to set your mind free,
Hmm.
it really made us be able to tell stories better, and to be able to
Yeah.
capture somebody, with words. And then becoming a teacher, sometimes I don't even realize, like, oh yeah, I can talk for a whole hour, and the kids are just like, wait, what? Like, the bell rang? What?
Yep.
That's it? Like, no, no, no. But you weren't done. I'm like, yeah. So
Oh yeah, you got
tomorrow.
them. Keep.
And so I tried to take that, when doing this. And I mean, I don't think there was anything more frightening for me than running that first game for adults, where they
Yeah.
were really nice to me. And my thing was like, okay, let me just keep the story straight in my head, and then we'll work out the mechanics later. And I think for that first game, it was really, like, it was frustrating. I think I was more nervous than they were. They were just like, all the guys who were in there were just like,
Yeah.
yeah, we're gonna have fun with this dude. And then they're like, oh man, like, he's telling a legit story, and it's just like getting serious. And I'm like, well, that's what I wanted. That's what. And I think for me, having played my first Eberron game with you, seeing how amazing you were at telling a story, like putting you in that moment, like like Jason and I were talking about it, like that Eberron, it was like, to some people who were watching us play, they're just like, man, that's a weird ass game that they're playing over there. But I got in my car and I was like in tears too. I was just like, man, like, we just saved a kid. Like, that it struck a chord being a dad, like, because you will do
Yes.
anything in your power to save a child. And here we were, and like, your buddy was just like, yeah, this kid's here. And I'm like,
Yeah. Yeah.
pick him up, and it's but being able to tell those story moments and get everybody in it, um that was like, for me, you set the high watermark. And for me, it'll always be
Exactly.
like, I'm always trying to do that. And I think part of the reason I like running the Eberron games is it's continually learning what's going on in the world, from the
Yeah.
past back up to now. And I treat every game as if I'm a teacher learning how to do this for the
Yeah.
first time. And it's every game is a learning process. And so,
Being. Oh no, go ahead.
okay.
I was just gonna say, being an instructor, because you cover a lot of really good things and like cover a lot of good areas that I want to even ask you questions on. So I would say like probably the big things is going back to being a teacher and being that you run games for, especially like you run games for kids that are on the spectrum and dealing with kids who have autism. I find it interesting, and everybody can like read an article about how D&D is affected and how it's a positive thing to bring these kids out of their shell and so forth. But you're on the front lines. You experience it. You see it in your family. You see it every day. If you had to like not sell, but if you had to tell it like a principal or someone at a school system why D&D is so impactful in this way, how would you describe that? And what would you tell them?
I actually did this to my principal, because he's
Right.
just like, what's up with these kids? Like, they're in your room, like the janitor's angry because they're having snacks in there. I'm like, look, I'm like, you say that, every administrator wants something that's going to build capacity in students, teach them responsibility, teach them to be critical thinkers, teach them to think outside the box, to problem solve, um, to uh, to act in a creative way, to be able to tell a story, and to work collaboratively with each other. Which for teenagers is the hardest thing in the world, because they're just like, I'm right, you're wrong. And it's
Yep.
just like, okay, well, you can't both be right and you can't both be wrong. So what is it?
Yep.
What's that middle ground? And watching them do that, I'm like, this is the perfect thing. And he's just like, yeah, well, and he was an English teacher as well, and so he's seen me work beforehand, and he's just like, okay. When I told him those things, and I'm like, that's why they're in my room. That's why we've been running it since school shut down. And that's why those kids keep coming back. And I think right now we're the only club that's still running. So,
Wow.
and they're like, yeah, so, and kids who kind of dropped out during summer, they're like,
Hmm.
we want back in. And parents have even asked me at back to school night last night, they're like, the D&D club is still running, and you're taking it over this year, right? And these are parents of kids who were in it beforehand,
Mm-hmm.
and they know, like, they have multiple children on the spectrum, and they're just like, no, we know. And some of them, their parents play, some of them their parents don't play, but they're willing to toss the kid the money to buy the D&D stuff because they can see it is working for them.
Yep.
And when they, we had a game in summertime where it was that ridiculous. After that first one, mom emailed me and she goes, that was the most I've seen him talk, the most I've seen him collaborate, the most I've seen him um, be himself and
Wow.
and talk about what he needs and wants to have happen. She's like, and it was only happening in your classroom, and when he
Mm-hmm.
wasn't in your classroom anymore, he kind of started to go back into himself,
Wow.
and being able to play that game gave him the necessary motivations to
Yeah.
do that, right? And so that's what I mean, I've like, some of the people that are professional development, they're like, yeah, so what do you do for fun? I'm like, D&D. And you
Yeah.
hear like the chuckles of other adults who are my age, a little bit older. I'm like, yeah, I also run the club at our school. And then, so then, break time comes, like, oh, so why are you doing that? And then I explain, and they're like,
And then it shuts them.
I'm like, yeah, so what do you got?
Yeah.
What do you do for
Because
your
the more
kids?
you connect those moments that are bringing them out of their show in the game, and you can connect those to real life scenarios, then they're more likely to start to kind of come out of show and be that outside of the game, And I don't think people don't understand that. People don't realize how often they are affected by the books they read and the TV shows they watch, the music they listen to, in for the positive or for the negative, for the best or the worst. And so D&D is one thing, is with the right group of people and the right positive push. I mean, it can only do great things for you. I was going to ask you, being as you just started for adults and even for kids, like this new journey that you've taken as being a game master, a dungeon master, what's one insecurity that you have right now of being a DM, and what does that look like? And then maybe, or what is, maybe it could be the same thing because it might be the same insecurity. And then what is one thing that you're like looking forward to kind of continuously working on or improving about your DM,
I
about your games?
I think it's getting a handle on like the technology, like when we use Roll20 or anything. Like, oh man, like I feel like such a noob, and I'm like, why am I feel like a monkey being handed like intricate tools to build, um, like a cathedral, and they're like,
Yeah.
go. And I'm like, I'm chiseling with, I'm like, how do you do the, but with somebody give you a picture of what a cathedral should look like, and you're like, go and build that. And I'm like, okay. And,
Yeah.
like we were talking about Nick's games, that's what it's like. I look at that and I'm like, oh. And I just kind of realized, like, okay, that's just my insecurity. And then as I've used the tool, I feel like I've gotten a little bit better at it, because I think once I turn that insecurity into like, oh, it's just a tool. So don't let it run you. Like, this thing, this
Yep.
bag of jelly in here is what's actually working.
Yep.
Anything else is just a tool. So I think that allowed me to like kind of play with Roll20, and like now I started doing like the maps on Dungeon Scrawl, and everyone was just like, "Oh, that's cool. It's just a little thing," and then they see how intricate at the end of the game I will show them, and they're like, why did you do that? And I'm like, because it's fun.
Yeah.
Um, and I learned how to do it, and I learned how
Yeah.
to obscure it in Roll20. But
Very
the main
cool.
thing is it always goes back to the story. But I think one thing that I don't mind, like I think that's the main insecurity. And then also, being called out on the rules. Like, I'm one of those people, like, I don't like to get things wrong, and I'll admit it. And whenever they like call me, I feel like I'm like, oh man, I should have known that. Why didn't I know that?
I feel that way all the time.
And now as I've played with you more, and we throw monkey wrenches into your plans, I'm like, that's what that looks like when we
Yeah.
do that. I'm like, okay, so I'm good. Like, I'm okay feeling that
Jason's good at that. He'll be like, Malcolm, you know that's not how that works. You know that monster can't actually do that, right? I'm like, well, I could do it today, okay? Like it's just like, but or
'Cause,
most of the time you're just like, you're right. I'm sorry, but yeah,
yeah,
inside it hurts. You're like, well, I should have known that. I should have spent a
yeah.
little bit more time in the book on that one part, or I should
Like on
know
page
this a bit.
72, paragraph 3, line 76, like it should be on there, and it's just like, oh
Yeah,
man.
man. I mean,
But
the game is too expansive to know. I mean, to keep it all crammed in your head and to be able to, keep the backstories and where the players are. I mean, at any given point as a DM, you realize just how, not to try to pat ourselves on the back, but just how much you're actually doing when it seems like you're doing nothing. Even when you're just sitting there being quiet and you're just looking around the table and they're all role playing, everybody thinks that's a break for the DM. It's actually not, because at that moment you have to continue to be listening to them. What are they saying? What are they saying that might change the story altogether about their plan? And then you're constantly going like, okay, what do I have coming up next? What do I do? And based on what they're about to do. And I got to be ready and make it seem seamless. It's just like,
I mean, and I think that is one of the things that scares me. It's like roll for initiative, and you're like, oh wait, what did I just ask them to do? Because this whole time you're supposed to be multitasking. You're like, yeah, that sounds good, and then they're gonna come up here and they're gonna get on that ridge, and all of a sudden, oh great, two beholders come out of the ground, and now you got to track them, and then you got to track what the character's doing, and also keep like the conversation flowing, and see like what was I trying to do, like what was my plan before they decided to do that thing I didn't want them to do that they did, and now I have to make them roll for it because they made a bad choice, but
Yep.
it was their choice.
Yep.
And it's just, yeah, it's a lot to juggle. And I think that uh, being a teacher has made it a little bit less stressful. It's
Yeah.
still stressful, but it's that good kind of stress where it's just like, all right, I see what you're doing. You're trying to throw me a curveball.
Yep.
Yeah, especially playing with players like Jason, and anybody else who plays with this. Is like there have been times where I'm like, why did you do that? Like, why did that is not what I had planned at all. I mean, that happened during summertime with our quiet game. It was not a quiet game at all. And it's not what we had planned. And I think that any person who's going to undertake being a dungeon master just needs to know. Teachers know this all the time, but I think most people don't realize it is. Um, be prepared to have your plan thrown out the window, and just be okay and willing to roll with it, because you have to remember, and I think this is what some dungeon masters and game masters forget, is the story's not yours. You're just giving the framework, and the players are the ones that are supposed to fill it. So
This is so true.
it's like, approach it the way that the characters in Inception did it, right? Where you're populating someone else's mind with ideas, but that's all you do.
Oh,
It's up to the player to take those ideas and then turn those seeds into something that is visual to them, because that's what draws them in. And just like you, like I get a lot of my ideas from film because I'm a very visual
yeah.
person. That's how I learn. But that's also how I try and teach, is the more my kids can see, the better their ideas come from. So you got to do the same thing with your players. um, and I'm still trying to find that balance, because I love using minis. I just don't have the equipment for it yet, or the
Yeah.
setup and the space. But then I also like, I'm loving what Nick is doing, and I'm like, man, that looks so cool. Like, how do you do that so seamlessly digitally?
Yeah.
But then there's like you with that perfect, like almost balance of like, man, Malcolm can do it all, and how does he do that? And you make it look like, yeah, that's no problem. And then we know, like, when you turn your screen off, we're like, he's scrambling.
Yeah, yeah. Uh-oh, he's setting up stuff. I'm trying to figure out what I'm gonna do. Yep. That's great, man. So that no, and that you make a lot of great points, and all good stuff. I think that as you make that transition, maybe something to think. What I often do when I didn't have like a lot of minis, or when we first started online, if you can plan out, have a number of pictures, and I think what really works with Eberron too, and you share pictures, just like share a photo
Yeah,
of a random thing you found, like what the tavern looks like. And I've noticed that doing that, I remember sometimes I run games. I don't think a lot of DMs do. Sometimes I run games with just PowerPoints, and I'll just go to certain imagery and have that, and I can just fade and just transition the scenes that way. And I feel like that does the same job that a set does, and some people get really kind of caught up on like my miniature standing here 5 feet away from you,
yeah,
and often we forget that if we're actually role playing and we're acting like this is all happening within 6 seconds, this round of combat, then technically those two people probably wouldn't still be standing there by the next turn. They would be they'd be like moving around. And so whenever somebody's like, oh, can he really be there, you'll notice, people would probably say I cheat, but I'm not. I just based on the way I see things happen in the world, if somebody can't get to like, they're trying to get around the back of a miniature and they're off by like 5 feet, I'm probably just going to push your character in, because chances are that miniature's probably not standing there anyway in the actual scene. At least maybe that's the way I justify it. So I think that you're doing a great job as you learn, and we're both all learning. It's a learning process and getting better. So I appreciate you jumping on with me and talking, and we know we could do this like all night. We often do.
Yeah.
So I appreciate the wife and the kids giving you a chance to take some of your time out of the night. So yeah, definitely appreciate it, Renee. If there's anything that you'd like to share before I close out, of like, if you had your selling point on people coming to your games, what would you say, like what to expect in terms of your style that might be different from maybe me or Nick or Eddie? What should I expect if I play a game with Renee?
I think it's a lot more story driven and like theater of the mind. I'm trying to use more images, especially when it's like Eberron stuff, because there's so much out there. And now I'm slowly starting to accumulate all those images and things like that from the old books and even the newer one that I just purchased. And so I really like that world, because I like the idea, especially being a lit teacher, of um, the the things that we call monsters aren't necessarily monsters. It's all your point of view.
Yes.
And I think that, to me, that's really appealing, um,
Yes.
especially in the country the way it is right now, where often the other
Absolutely.
is not considered, the thing that you want to watch out for.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of take it as like, the monsters are fun. The monsters are what breathe life to the
Yeah.
hero, right? But then the opposite thing is, what if the monsters aren't really those things? What if it's just,
Yep.
especially in Eberron, right? It's the humans who've done this to the world.
Yeah.
So what happens when the people who are supposed to be, the heroes, collide with the things that are supposed to be monsters?
Yep.
What stories do you get out of that? And I think it's a cool selling point. Um, I can't take any credit for that. I think that was all Wizards of the Coast and Keith Baker for creating it. But
Yeah.
it's just such a rich um, mining of stories. And so it's, if you get one of my games, that's what you're going to get. You're going to get an interesting way of playing. You can pretty much be anything. That's like the thing is, if it exists in D&D, it's got a place in
Mm-hmm.
Eberron. Um, so I think that really
That's
opens
actually
up.
really.
Yeah, I think it opens up a lot of player possibilities, and some of the stories have been just crazy so far.
Yeah.
And I have to thank my players, because I'm like, oh yeah, they did that, so maybe I can try this. Let's see what I can throw at them next.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah,
You've said that before, but I think you really hit the nail on the head today. I've heard you say it before, but I think it really resonated with me today. That idea that I think you really like Eberron, because all the other worlds of D&D, the Dragonlances, the Forgotten Realms, they're very cut and dry on who's the good guys and who's the bad guys. And then often you're playing with people around the table and you're looking at their actions of the good guys and you're going, these are bad guy actions. Like often adventurers are doing bad guy things, in my opinion, and a lot that's why often I sometimes punish my players for killing random. They're killing monsters, but like they kill in a way where, did you really need to kill? Was that the way to get through that particular
right.
challenge? But I just wanted to I wanted to smite something today, so I killed it. And I think that you and I have a unique perspective of, you growing up in East LA, me growing up in Inglewood, and being so into fantasy, and often realizing that the way, while we're not, in monsters anyway, but the way our cultures are depicted in these stories are often the monsters. And
Yeah,
so everyone gives us a world where like a bugbear is not a bad guy, necessarily inherently a bad guy, and nor there's a drow or anyone more inherently evil than even the humans themselves, right?
right.
They're all inherently capable of terrible, terrible things. And everyone's perspective on each other is what makes them do those terrible things. And so you really nailed that. And I think that is a perspective that I think you get with your games. If you play with Renee, you get someone who really takes the time to understand even the monsters that you fight. You feel like there's a story behind anything that you throw at the players. They just don't seem like they're not random encounters. Nothing is random in your game, and that's
Yeah.
cool. So I
and
appreciate that.
and I think that goes back to like the stories that I want to tell, like playing with the noir and playing with the mystery
Yeah.
and playing with the adventure and putting all in. And then I also just want to ride an owlbear because it seems like
Hey,
a
man.
lot of fun.
Speaking of, Rene is a published author, just wrote his first game, and we're really excited for him. It's called Last Hiss. Keep saying it's called Last Hiss. It's on the DMs Guild. I think I also saw it on RPG's RPG Drive Through.
I think they put it, yeah. So I opted to put it into the bundle. So I think
Nice.
it's in bundle two. There's
Sweet.
some great games in there. Mine is, I'm not considering mine a great one. I just think it was the way that I told Malcolm is getting into this hobby has become more than a hobby. It's become like a passion.
Yeah.
So being able to tell a story in a different way, like for me, that's great. And being able to put it out there and be like, okay, I wrote this thing, and now it's out there. Now, please, people, play it. I want to know
Play
what
it.
you think,
Yeah.
and throw your own flavor into it. But I think that the the whole thing of being able to put it out there and have people play test it, that's going to be the cool thing, because I just want to know that, because I'm a teacher.
Yep.
Tell me what I did a good job on. Critique me, and please be blunt. Like,
Yep.
if you think that something sucks, like, tell me. I'll go in and I'll change it. And
And that's why I've been refraining from asking you any questions about it, because I'm
yeah,
going to run it next week. But I don't want to. I want to say, okay, I don't. I want to act like, and I've already cheated a little bit, but I want to. I want to say, I don't know Rene. I just bought this. How would I interpret what he put on paper? And then I want to play it with you, and I want you to go, man, that was really off. That was not what you didn't play that anything like the way I saw it being played, or like, oh wow, you nailed the major points, what I was looking for out of the story, and maybe you put your little Malcolm spin on it. I'm hoping to hear what you think about that, and then hoping to see you run it one day and play at your table to see how you put a spin on your own game. So
yeah.
I'm really excited to play Last Hiss and to play it both as a player and to run it. I'm going to be running it
That, I
next
mean,
week.
that's
So
Yeah, I think that's all I wanted. Like, my original idea was, I'm going to write something for the DMs Guild, because I did get a scholarship to do that, which was really cool. And I don't know
awesome.
which entity that gave it to me. I was just like, cool, yeah. And then it was like that pressure for all of July, where I'm up till 3 or 4 in the morning, and Malcolm can tell you, if you ask him, like, he'd be texting me, and he's like, "You're still up?" I'm like, "I'm still writing, man. My brain is not stopping." And my original idea is write something for kids, and then I'm like, you know what? I'm running all these Eberron games for adults. That's where my mind is. I'm like, so what is a game that I would want to play? Right? I mean, you hear all of these great writers, Neil Gaiman, Stephen King. They're always doing the whole, well, I wrote the story for me, and if people like it, great. And I'm like, why don't I just do that? Like, I've wanted to be a writer. I did the UCLA writing project. Like, I've tried to put stories out there. And I think the reason why some of the stuff, gets tossed back to you, is that you're probably not doing it for the reason that you should be, which is write something that you would enjoy reading or writing or
Yes.
drawing or looking at. And
Yes.
that was the switch. And I'm like, man, this, like, then the writing was smooth. I'm like, this is so much fun. Like, this is what I would want. If it was a game, this is what I would need. And if it's an Eberron game, this is what I would want in it. And this is what I was doing. And I'm like, and here's the movie that came with this, and here's the piece of art
Yeah.
that goes with that. And it was just, I'm like, okay, so cool. So I got all my hobbies into one. and so I'm excited because I finally get to play it. So, and anyone else who wants to, so it's available on DM's Guild. It's Last Hiss. You can find it under the Eberron section. If you go to DM's Guild, you just go to the settings, and it's in Eberron. I can't tell you what page it is on anymore. I was excited. I'm like, it's on page 1, and then it moved down, and I'm like, I don't know where it is. Just type it in, and people have been finding it. And so I'm excited to play it.
Awesome.
And yeah, one of these days I will run it. Because school's starting to pick up, and I'm going to need that outlet too. I
Yeah.
can't just be in front of this, just talking to students and
Yeah.
getting them to work, like, and sending emails. Like, I need to be able to, like, put my players um, into that setting, and I think that will be fun, because um, it took me quite a bit of time, and I felt like, yeah, somebody was saying, yes, you are worthy enough to participate in this project.
Hey
And so
man,
that was the push.
you definitely are, and I am, you know, happy and to have you a part of the group and have you running the games even when you can run them, because and I think the players really enjoy what you bring to the game. And so I appreciate you. And it's been an awesome kind of ride just in a short amount of time, knowing you. So yeah, go check out Last Hiss. Join if you want to play with Rene on any of his Eberron games. You want to join the D&D Experience Point on meetup.com. I have some of, we gotta get some of your games recorded to share them with people. We don't have any of those just up yet, but you can also check the Gentleman Game Master out on YouTube or Instagram I'm constantly sharing, the games that I play with these guys, and all of the folks there. So, and we will be running Last Hiss next Tuesday. So if you want to join that one on Meetup, you can. And I think that's really it. And then I'll probably end up putting that one up so you get to watch Rene, me try to see how he survives in a story he created for me to mess with him with. So, and I have to figure out a way to kind of keep it fresh without you knowing everything that's going to happen. So I'm still going to play with that, but it's going to be fun.
Yeah, I think I'm with school being in full swing now. Like I'm like, yeah, I wrote something. I'm like, there's beats about it, but I'm like, my brain is slowly just turning to jelly with all the things I'm having to do. And I'm like, yeah, I wrote something, stuff happens in it. And, so if you play with us and I wind up getting one shot at it, it's, it's a possibility. It is a Malcolm game.
I know.
And so
I'm excited what you build for it, what character you build for it. That should be fun.
I haven't even done, I need to do that. Oh man, that's like one more thing I need to do. But yeah, so I appreciate it. And to all of our players that are doing D&D Experience Points games, like, thank you. Like I told Malcolm, I feel that we've got a good group of game masters, a good group of players. And I always tell them at the end of the game, like, thank you, because we appreciate it. Even though you're paying for this game, you're paying for the experience. That's something that you could have done somewhere else.
Agreed.
And the simple fact that you are taking your time out during a week or weekend, and you keep coming back, like, to us, that means the world, because that means, hey, we're providing you with an entertainment that you enjoy. So, and I have to thank Malcolm, because, had it not been for him, I wouldn't be doing this and having as much fun as I'm having. So
thanks, man. I appreciate you all, because I couldn't do it without good people to play with, and that are willing to see the value in what, we all bring to the table. So thank you, man. All right, folks. Well, we've been talking long enough. This was supposed to be a 15-minute interview, so we're going to go ahead and jump off. You guys have a good one. I'll see you next. We'll catch you guys later. Bye.